Namaste, everyone. Thank you for joining us for another session of Indica Yoga's Yoga Insights. I'm Sophie French. So our session today is going to be a dialogue about Raghuji's, Raghu Ananthanarayanan's most recent book. So if y'all have been following Indica Yoga, I'm sure y'all are familiar with Raghuji's work because he's been part of our global festival of yoga. And today we're going to be doing a session on his new book, which is called 5 Seats of Power. So just before we start the session, a little bit about Raghuji. Raghuji is a behavioral scientist, a yoga teacher, and an author. He has dedicated his life to the study and application of yoga and Indic traditions to guide the inner transformation of individuals and shape leadership and cultural building of organizations. He is also actively engaged with building Ritambara Ashram, a collective for inner transformation, as its chief mentor. Raghuji is also the co-founder of the Center for Consciousness Studies and Inner Transformation, and he lives in the Nilgiris. Also joining Raghuji today will be Maggie Ji and Rajiv Ji. Maggie Ji is a social entrepreneur, a mountain lover, and a lifelong student of yoga. She is currently working on sustainable fashion and diversity, inclusion, and social equity. She started her career in technology and later found her passion in social causes. She's an advocate of women's health and has recently co-authored a book on menopause. She's a yoga teacher and an avid trekker. She currently lives in Bangalore. And also joining us today is Rajiv Ji, Rajiv Kuchal Ji. He has spent more than 3 decades in the IT BPO industry, mainly with the Infosys Group. He's led Infosys' foray into telecom and product engineering services space in the early 90s and was a founding team member of Progeon. He was Chief Operating Officer at OnMobile. He is currently active in tech investment space as a general partner at Xfinity Ventures and in a social sector where he is associated in professionalizing grassroots NGOs. He has been associated quite closely with the writing of the 5 Seats of Power and producing it as a service offering for the corporate world. So in today's session, Raghuji will discuss his latest book, The 5 Seats of Power. As I said before, the book is about leadership insights from the Mahabharata and is an invaluable guide to becoming the best that one can be. It uses insights from the Yoga Shastra and the Mahabharata to offer principles and practices to enable behavioral transformation. So let's welcome Maggie Ji, Rajiv Ji, and Raghuji. Please join the session. Namaste.
Thank you, Sophia.
Thank you, Sophia.
Thank you so much for joining Indica Yoga's Yoga Insights. So I'll hand over the session to you now, and I'll see you towards the end. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Sophie.
Thank you, Sophia. So, Raghu, let me start.
Yeah.
When I started working with you, now it's about 5 years, again, reworking with you in the third or fourth phase. What I found very fascinating was how you saw the Mahabharata characters as not something out there. We were all told about role modeling and how do you learn and follow from others. Whereas here you came up with a very different concept where they said it's not out there, but it's in there within you.
Yeah.
So these are not heroes to be worshipped or villains to be hated, but very, your feelings, your behaviors, which come out from somewhere. How did you come up with this insight? I mean, it was just so powerful that instead of looking out, how I start looking in.
Yeah. Interesting question. It takes me all the way back, almost 40 years, Rajiv. When I first started working with a very important person in Tamil theatre called Namuthuswamy. Yeah, I was on the board of Kuthupatrai, and we had a lot of discussions about how to bring inner work to his theatre artists. Yeah, so many of the people who are very well known today in Tamil theatre have all gone through some of these workshops with me. Pashupati, Kalyarani, Somu, Gavin Babu, many of them. So there we used to have a lot of discussions about traditional theatre, especially traditional Tamil theatre, which is largely based on the Mahabharata. And then there's another very important person in the theatre field who's influenced my work, and the two of them we would have a lot of discussions on the nature of acting in the Indian context compared to the Western. Yeah, so Anmol, for example, is a very well-known figure in theatre. And when we were working with the concepts like this, and many of the theatrical productions made by Muthuswami would be on the Mahabharata. Right? So there is a very strong idea in Tamil theatre, and I think in all Indian theatre, that there is a way of acting, but this action has to come from understanding the tattva of the character. Now, the word tattva would, I think, be close to archetype. Right? So if I'm playing the role of a mother in a particular form, okay, somebody's mother, Kunti, for example, in this context, right? I'm a mother. I have to understand matritvam, which is not just being a mother, but the essential feature of a mother, which is universal in all people. When an actor touches that, they can then evoke this in everybody in the audience who is sensitive and who's watching. So through this process, what happens is, in dance also there's a very interesting idea which is called sadharanikaranam. When an actor can touch this level of his own inner or her own inner sensitivity, they evoke this in all the people in the audience. And then, even if very difficult, very harsh emotions are portrayed, the feeling that is left behind in the person is one of sweetness of an experience. It's called madhuram. And transformation becomes possible. So it's an extremely powerful idea which has been used in Indian theatre for a long time. So I've just followed that idea and taken it to organizations, help leaders to look at it, and so on. And then it becomes a very powerful inside-out understanding of how I can be a leader. Because I don't think leadership behavior can ever be imitated. If you imitate, you're not original, you're not authentic. You cannot be powerful. Yeah, power will happen only if I come from inside out with tremendous conviction and authenticity. Right? So this helps you to do that.
That's very interesting, Raghu. And you also talk about archetypes in the beginning of the book. You explain what an archetype is.
Yeah.
Coming from the corporate world, particularly from my diversity background, we keep arguing against deciding on a pattern, a stereotype. We tell people not to stereotype and go beyond that. So this word archetype and stereotype, you talk a little bit, but is it possible to tell us the nuance between the two?
Sure. See, let's take something like Bhima, Maggie. Bhima will be looked at as a masculine figure, right? And Draupadi will be seen as feminine normally, not because they are man and woman. But if you boil it down to the essential feature, the archetypal energy of Bhima, it is just courage. Courage has no gender, right? You will demonstrate courage in one way, Draupadi will demonstrate it in one way, Bhima will demonstrate it in one way. But essentially, it is the power of passion, right? Mm-hmm. It's the power of being action-oriented. So Bhima's character will always be shown, even in the Tamil Kuthu tradition, as somebody who's very impulsive. When he comes on stage, the way he dances will arouse you immediately. Whereas when a Yudhishthira comes into the stage, he'll be very subdued in his dance. It'll be very sharp, slow movements, right? So these are archetypal, and when Vidura comes on stage, Vidura and he are supposed to, and Yudhishthira are supposed to be similar archetypes. They'll dance in similar ways. They'll have similar movements. Right? So these are all beyond gender. And if you start looking at it as the essential power, right, then anybody can internalize it and evoke it from inside. Right? So if you look at the Pandavas, there are 5 types of powers. Na? Yudhishthira is the one who establishes order, structure, right? Bhima establishes power through action and passion, right? Nakula through service and selflessness. Yeah, Sahadeva is the one who's curious and understands knowledge. And the most important in my understanding is Arjuna, because he can ask deep questions. And yeah, so he brings in the whole idea of Dharma sankata and asks what is dharmic before an action is done. So these become 5 very important powers. And the whole of Mahabharata is structured in terms of opposing ways in which these powers or these archetypal energies are brought out. Yeah, so if you take Bhima and Duryodhana, they have the same power. They learn from the same teacher. They are both Gadadharis. But Bhima is constantly able to listen to Yudhishthira, listen to Krishna, his brothers, and bring out his power in a dharmic way. Whereas Duryodhana, with the same power, will listen to nobody. He doesn't listen to his parents. He won't listen to anybody except when they support him and instigate him or encourage him. But essentially, they're the same power. So when you understand it this way, then each of us can start asking the question, how am I using my power? Am I using my power in a way that enlivens me, enlivens you, enlivens the world we live in, which is what is the simple idea of dharma? Or am I using my power for extraction, for being self-centric? And the whole of the Mahabharata is just a story of this.
Yeah.
People with similar phenomenal energies, extremely capable, talented people, one set who constantly use it in self-centered ways and the other who constantly question themselves.
Right, just to put it in the corporate lingo, if I may, it is go beyond what is externally visible as patterns, beyond gender, beyond nationality, race, or whatever, and get into the energy of the person, what the person is bringing as energy.
Absolutely.
And Dharma is the context, in a sense, that in which this energy is expressed.
Yeah.
So, Raghu, you brought up issue of Bhima and Duryodhana. And if I can use the term in a way that this is a little more black and white, right? I mean, at least the way it is perceived, that Bhima was very dharmic and Duryodhana wasn't a dharmic, very selfish. But you know what surprised, at least to me, was the characterization, or at least the description of Bhishma as a kind of a shadow type of Yudhishthira. And Bhishma, in our popular narrative, anybody who has sacrificed, and Karna for that matter, anybody who has done so much of sacrifice is somebody we respect and we adore and we admire. And Bhishma Pitama is considered it's an epithet, it's a great thing.
Yeah.
So how do you reconcile that? I mean, here suddenly it's no longer as black and white, right? I mean, they look like very good guys, so to speak.
Yeah. See, in Indian thought, Rajiv, there is no black and white like you have, like in Western, this thing, there's good and bad, good and evil, nah? Right? Even when you talk about Ravana and Rama, Ravana and all these asuras are actually coming from Vaikuntha. They're the Jaya and Vijaya, the two guardians of Vaikuntha who forget that they're supposed to be guardians of Vaikuntha, think that they own the power and then start hassling people. So they're reminded of this and they go back. Ravana is a phenomenal guy. He's a great musician. He's an extremely learned person. Same with all of these people. Duryodhana is also described in the Mahabharata itself as a fairly benevolent, good king. But when it comes to dealing with the Pandavas, he gets caught with envy, which he himself talks about. The same way, Bhishma in his deathbed speaks about this. He says, look, though I knew so much about Dharma, my eyes were blocked. I became blinded because I was living in the home of Duryodhana and I had made certain promises to myself I couldn't stand up and break what was the conventional dharma, conventional idea of dharma. I wish I had done this. Yeah, and Draupadi asks him specifically, because he speaks in his deathbed about how a king should look after women and weak people and all that. So she gets a little angry and says, why didn't you help me? He says, I'm extremely sorry, my eyes were blinded. So that is the difference. Na? So he is a great person, he understands dharma, but he is not able to contextually say what is a dharmic action. He goes by the rules and regulations, which is not actually dharmic in that context.
In many ways, one of the takeaways, at least I had, and you can comment, is that Bhishma had the power he didn't use. And not using a power to let things go in a dharma or make sure dharma prevails is also a dharmic. So inaction is not acceptable.
Of course. He says that, no? He says I was constrained. I couldn't find my courage to act and change what was supposed to be legal. See, there's a whole discussion also about nyaya and niti, you know. What is the principle of fairness and dharma, and what is the written word of the legal position, sort of, you know, what in today's term we would call a legal position. So he kind of got stuck between the two and could not make a choice and abdicated the tension of the two choices.
This makes
So
me
this
also
is very critical in leadership situations, na Rajiv?
Yeah.
Do I just follow a tradition? Do I just follow something that's been laid down? And do I have the courage to shift and change things because I see contextually that it's not the right thing to do? It's a very, very critical thing.
Yeah, I was just going to ask something, but I think you partly answered that, Raghu, is, you know, sometimes when we have something so close to us, especially something like Mahabharata, we can see where the story fails, where the story is glorious. And sometimes it's difficult for us to, you know, look at that as a reference point for us to make decisions. Because it's so flawed. Bhishma had this flaw, and Duryodhana had this flaw, and Draupadi had this injustice happen to her. So then now how do we take these lessons from up? Why should Mahabharata even be a reference for leadership? I think that's what I'm getting.
Nagi, what can you and I do? It's been a reference point for some 5,000 years. And you go to villages, you know how powerful these stories are, right? Even in casual conversation, somebody will say, don't behave like a Yudhishthira. This is not the time for that. Don't behave like Bhima. It's in casual conversation. It's only us English educated people who've lost this just now. In Tamil Nadu, we've had this unbroken tradition of Mahabharata Kuttu for more than 1,000 years.
Right.
And people come, they know the stories, they will rework the stories. And if I've been to these village things when they tell these stories, they use the stories as a mirror. And when the story is told or enacted, people from the audience will also join in and shout and say, how dare you behave like this? And, you know, they will also refer to their own home situation sometimes. So it becomes a collective catharsis of a kind at one level. At another level, it becomes a mirror unto themselves. Right? And this is recommended. See, there's a very important person called Suptankar who was very concerned with the way Mahabharata was getting interpreted in the early 1900s by the Orientalists. So he talks about 3 ways in which it was being looked at. First is a historic way. Did it happen? Did it not happen? When did it happen? And all that. Right? He said this is completely useless because whether it happened or not, in the minds of the common Indian, it's an extremely relevant living story. It's not a historical story of a long time back. The second he says is a lot of people are ending up using it moralizing, which is the problem you're talking about. He says you cannot look at a story of 5,000 years back with today's morals. If you want to, you have to look at it from the prevailing idea of right and wrong. But he says both of these are not useful. The only useful way is to make it current, right? Which is the meaning of the word Itihasa Purana. You make it relevant for now because you see how I reflect the character within me. And then it becomes a powerful tool for self-reflection and yoga. Because these are also yogic texts. Huh?
Yeah.
So it's very clearly stated there that this is the most useful way of looking at these and not having debates about what happened to Draupadi, what's happening to Draupadi within me. How is the Bhima within me behaving? How is the Bhishma within me behaving? Then it becomes extremely useful, right? And remember, it was all written by one mind, no? These are stories that came out of Vyasa's mind. So he has, in a sense, put out this canvas of a psyche, of his psyche. So we can be Vyasas of our story, no? And
Yeah.
look at how.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Raghu, you brought Draupadi, and it keeps on coming again and again. And I remember one of the things which strongly evoked in me in the book, that though it has been projected the way it is, if I see the Draupadi within me, and I see what happened as an extreme form of humiliation, public humiliation, it happens to us all the time.
Yeah.
Not all the time, but it happens to us, at some point or other, it has happened to us.
Yeah.
Or will happen to us.
Yeah.
But what I was so amazed, and I didn't realize till, I got associated with you and especially with the book, that how Draupadi never felt a victim.
That's right.
She knew that she is going through what she is going through because of the fact that she's also privileged. It is being done because of her position.
Yeah.
And she was extremely angry. She was very humiliated, but she kept her anchor. And the whole thing about Krishna being your deep innermost conscious means if you hold within yourself, then the world may try to humiliate you. And the fact that, they couldn't finally disrobe her fully meant that they could not take away her dignity.
Absolutely.
And that to me was, it is the most famous or infamous incident.
That's right.
And that is what really was to me the most amazing part of the book and the journey.
That's right. That's right. Yeah. And that's a very critical thing, Rajiv, because most of us, when we don't know how to keep this inner anchorage in whatever the form of Krishna is within us, we allow external contexts to dictate who we are rather than really come out with our authenticity and our power and our independent choice making, right? And in any leadership position, this is a very critical thing. Am I just being pulled and pushed by the context around me because the context is very powerful and I can't hold myself in a clear anchorage and clear thinking? Yeah. This is a very important thing.
And the other point also which I wanted to ask when we're talking about Bhishma, Raghu, is the concept of Dharma sankata, right? And that is something which comes out beautifully, in your book, and definitely when you refer back to Mahabharata, every place where that comes up. And in the leadership context, it is very, very critical. So how do you see it, practically people understanding that and even even understanding the concept of Dharma, which is so complex. The Dharma Sankat comes from not knowing what your Dharma is at that point in time. And then today, where we call it the VUCA world, with everything changing and even our morals changing from year to year.
Yeah.
So what
Yeah,
would
it
be?
becomes more important today, Maggie. Yeah. See, the way I understand it is this, no? If you look back in Indian, uh, the historical way in which people looking at things, the model of a great leader in India is Vikramaditya, right? Krishna and all may be heroes, but as a leader and as a king, Vikramaditya is the model. And if all of us have read Vikramaditya and Betal stories, they're all stories of double bind and Dharma sankata. All of them, right from the beginning. Yeah. And anybody who's been in any leadership position, both of you have been in leadership positions, all the time, what is the critical decision? People who come to you with a decision to be made know more than you about the exact consequence. They probably know more about that particular issue than you do. Right? Because they're the guys on the job, they're the guys who are handling the issue. Why are they coming to you? And what is the decision you have to make? You have to see whether what they're doing is right in the short run and in the long run. You have to see whether what they're doing is right in their small context and in the larger context of the organization.
Yeah.
You'll have to see whether this is strategic or merely tactical or reactive. All of these are dharma sankatas. Na? If you look at it from one point of view, one decision will seem right. If you look at it from another point of view, another one will seem right. And you have to say, what will enable the organization to grow? And today, most organizations will, if they don't, they ought to realize that you should not just ask the question, what will make my organization grow, but what will sustain the earth?
Yes, absolutely.
Right? So the dharmic question then becomes even more critical today. Na? And that is what the person, like a manager, let's say, on the job, will find it difficult to decide whether a leader, right? A leader has to be able to make these decisions. He's constantly sitting on dharma sankatas. And if he doesn't realize that, he will get caught in confusion. Or he'll react in one way without understanding and then find that he has let something else go. Yeah, so if I put it back into the context of the book and the context of the Mahabharata, there are situations which will come up to you which are not clearly saying this is a war situation. So this is not a Bhima situation. Right? It could be Bhima, it could be Yudhishthira. How do you scale up? Scaling up is a Yudhishthira question, but getting this innovation in is a Sahadeva question. That's the power of curiosity and knowledge, right? How do I balance these two? When do I invest in infrastructure building? When do I deploy infrastructure? These are all Dharma Sankata questions which a leader has to answer, right? And this is the importance of Arjuna. Na? Arjuna is the person who's the archetypal character who is willing to ask these questions, right? And when you ask these questions, it's not an intellectual thing, yeah? You'll sweat and you lose sleep over it. No? I'm sure, right, Rajiv, when you have lost sleep over these
Right.
kind of questions, right? How do I make the right decision? And every now and again, you'll get a flash of intuition. And if you trust your gut, those will be the best decisions of your life. Whenever you've overanalyzed, you'll screw up.
Yeah.
Very true.
What made Arjuna so special? I mean, in your view, Arjuna is clearly that archetype.
Yeah.
So, what is it that archetype which made that so special?
See, in my understanding, it's something like this here. One, he is extremely versatile. Yeah, he's called Sabyasachi. He's extremely versatile person. Yeah. And the other is the deeper questions of meaningfulness, questioning the paradigm itself and not taking the paradigm for granted is Arjuna. Right? And also I think it's very critical, and Maggie was referring to it, he is the quintessential Indian hero because he examines his femininity. So the Ajñatavasa, which is an extremely important part right? Even today in psychology, they're all talking about the shadow. The Ajnatavasa time is described clearly as the shadow process. And the time after they come back as the sun coming out from behind the clouds. These descriptions are given in the Mahabharata. So they understand the shadow thing. He has to examine his femininity. Right? And one of the criticisms that's made of Indians by Orientalists is most Indians are too feminine. Right? And a lot of Indian managers are very compassionate. I think today we need this, yeah? And we need this thing of sitting back and saying, how do I balance the masculine and feminine powers? How do I look at a context? All of which Arjuna does. Right? And when he does it, when he asks those questions, he goes through the psychosomatic symptoms of asking fundamental, difficult questions on which you've built your identity almost.
Yeah.
Right? So he's a phenomenal hero of an inner journey, fundamentally, which is why he's talking to Krishna.
Yeah. In fact, I remember one of the, when he is given all the training by Indra in all the weapons. And Indra says, now that you have learned all the weapons, it's time you learn the dance and the various
Correct.
art forms.
Correct.
And maybe all that is required to make a person complete.
Of course. Of course.
So, coming back to the book and its application to the corporate world, one of the very interesting, so a very small anecdote, and you will normally not even realize the gravity of or importance of it, was that on the last day of the war. So one is, of course, that the leaders from Pandavas were chosen every day based on the situation.
Correct.
And Kauravas was based on some hierarchy. But it was on the last day, Krishna said Yudhishthira is going to be the leader.
That's right.
Whereas if you look at it, it was, always the archetypes fighting with its own shadow. So for Duryodhana was the only one left. So ideally it should have been in Bhima. And it was very interesting. I'll tell you the corporate context also, because I met somebody who was that time involved in a M&A scenario. They were getting acquired, and there was a lot of talk going on. And he very frustratingly said, in my scenario, what is the role of Yudhishthira? So here we are at final stages. And he is, of course, you could make out that this person who was leading this group which was being acquired is a very Yudhishthira leader. And he was feeling very frustrated because he had all these bhimas coming in from all the places, right, on him, and he didn't know how to deal with it. So, it was very fascinating because, in fact, I said, it's required because a bhima will continue to steamroll, whereas now you have to integrate, right? I mean,
That's right. That's right.
so, you wonder that how do you elicit, how do you cull out some of these learnings from Mahabharata and contextualize to your word? And you say, no, this is a scenario out there, but this is a scenario within me, or where I am find myself currently.
Yeah. See, good question. Yeah. See, if you look at these things archetypally, you have to understand 4 forms in which you come out and you deploy these energies. Like, for example, what you're talking about is the heroic possibility of a Yudhishthira, who can go into chaos and create order. Right? Whereas the heroic capability of a Bhima is to go into the unknown and fight with energy and with passion. Right? If you have to create peace, you cannot be fighting with this complete passion, very little forethought. Every action has to have this context of how do I create order and rule a peace time. Right? So that's the heroic capability of a Yudhishthira. Right? There's a functional capability, which is to follow rules, to make things predictable, make things safe for everybody. And we looked at the dysfunctional, which is Bhishma. where I get so caught with the rule and the law that I don't know when to be flexible. I become rigid instead of becoming contextually intelligent. And the shadow would be when you use these rules and regulations and things like that to actually exercise illegitimate power, which is what Duryodhana does. Duryodhana very cleverly quotes the law, but quotes it and uses it for completely self-centered purposes. Right? So every character will have all these four. So through understanding the Mahabharata and through really looking at it as a mirror unto oneself, I can look at it and say, how am I bringing this ability? All of us have these 5 abilities. Am I bringing it out appropriately? Am I bringing out my Bhima in a Yudhishthira situation, which is the question you're asking, right? Or am I being a Yudhishthira in a Bhima situation when I have to fight? Am I trying to be very, quote something and whatever, right?
Yeah.
So this is one critical thing. And the other is to understand my own propensity as well. Maybe I'm a very good Bhima, right? Or a very good Sahadeva. Do I know how to create a team which balances my capabilities and creates a complementarity? Because I cannot be at a heroic potential in all the 4 or all the 5. So this is one way of doing it, and we've discussed it quite a bit in the book, how to look at these things. And once a person catches on, they can then read the Mahabharata and they'll get hundreds of insights. Because what we're offering is the key. We can't write a 10-volume, 400 pages per volume book, right? For the Mahabharata for the manager. It has to be 250, 300 pages, which gives you the key and all the essentials. The interesting thing, Rajiv, is just last week, I had shared this book with a person in America, a friend of mine in America. He came back and said that he loved the book because he understood what archetypes were finally. And he doesn't know the Mahabharata very well. I was very thrilled with that.
Lovely.
So it is a universal story, Maggie.
It definitely is. And that is where I think, sometimes I think we have lost the ability to understand our life from that context. It's become something outside of us instead of something internal to us.
Yeah. No, I think it's coming back now, especially after the COVID and all that. And also, a lot of stuff I'm reading now, even in management books and management papers, they are taking the Sustainable Development Goals seriously. They are looking at the fact that there is an inward reflective process necessary for leadership. There's much more discussion about it than before, and there's lots of discussion about how to look at paradoxes and polarities. Yeah, so there is an awareness of this. The idea of Rambo as the hero is dissolving.
Absolutely. That brings to the, age-old question, and, taking an inspiration from leadership journeys, which are described in the book. You talk about Ms. Anuaga and Mr. Mustafa, very different backgrounds, very different experiences, but they both were transformational leaders. So, and then Mahabharata also has a lot of these leaders. We have Karna, who is forever searching for his identity, and Yudhishthira's leadership, and then Arjuna coming, and Krishna's own background, how he plays things. So this whole formula for leadership, do circumstances play a part, or is it a born trait? How does one discover one's leadership without feeling like an imposter?
That's a difficult question to answer, Maggie. Yeah, because see, if I look at myself, I think it was because I went through difficult circumstances that something in me said, hey, get up and fight your fights and take your battles head on. You can't be weeping like a victim. Na? It's all very nice. You're hurt with this, you're hurt with that. You tell people, they say, oh, very good, very good. And second time, they're going to kind of listen to your story. Third time, they're going to say, what a bore, no? So I have to get up, and if they are my battles, I have to fight my battles. If I don't, I'm letting myself down, right? And I think all contexts, na, there is a difficult context. Some people are willing to stand up and say, I'm going to fight it. I'm going to do my best. Some people are going to wait. And I just have no clue what triggers this. But I've seen leaders of very, very different kinds. I've seen people who are aggressive, who are great leaders. I've seen people who are extremely thoughtful, innovative, who've been in very high CEO positions, right? A whole cross section. Yeah. So it's very difficult to say, what triggers this. But the one thing we can say is, once the person starts taking on leadership positions, it's very important for that person to learn how to be reflective and introspective. Because Rajiv, I'm sure, has experienced this. There are a lot of startups where people start with tremendous energy. They have an idea. They don't know how to introspect as the context is changing. Right? So they're just overdoing. They just, right? So that doesn't help. So there are people with great leadership potential who've taken the first step, right? But the essential ingredient after you have come up and said, I will do my best, is to be introspective and really learn about yourself, really start being aware of what is happening around, find inner balance, and so on. These are very, very critical.
Just a follow-up quick question on this, Raghu. I think we're coming close also. Is the relevance of all this to the younger generation, the so-called digital natives who are like always connected? They walk, they're texting, and these are the people who are coming into the world today, and they're the ones who we're going to leave behind. Is there even an archetype that, that makes sense for them? And sometimes it feels really, I get really worried because they don't pause to reflect. They don't even access a lot of these things which are in their tradition and culture. So,
see, I'm
what are your
hopeful,
thoughts?
Maggie. I'm hopeful. Maybe just because when there's a self-selection before people come to me, I don't know. I'm meeting a lot of young people who are very serious. Yeah, who are asking questions about sustainability, who are really concerned about war and strife and the kind of polarizations that are going on and things like that. I'm meeting quite a few people like that, right? And they also talk about, they say, what do we do with our friends who are not so serious, right? But I have a feeling there are, it's not, I wouldn't at all stereotype the younger group. I think there are a lot of serious people, and see the number of people who have been in organizations and in their 40s who drop out and go and do work in the social sector and other things. You're an example also of that, no? Right?
Yeah.
So many people like this, yeah.
Yeah.
In their 40s and 30s and all, who are turning around and saying, no, I don't want to work in an organization that is not going to lead to sustainability. I'm going to work for social justice. I mean, Lead for India or Teach for India is such a successful model, no? Because so many young people are joining it and taking it seriously. Yeah. So I'm very hopeful, Maggie, that, as the crisis grows, there will also be younger people who stand up and say, no, man, we have to understand how to be the solution. We can't just, be taken away, carried away.
Great. I think we have a lot of audience questions. Rajiv, should we consolidate
sure.
that? And
Sure.
Yeah.
Thanks a lot. Yeah, they were nice, interesting questions for us to think about.
I think I'll hand it over to Sophia, but one which stood out for me, and I will bring it up because it kind of resonated with what I see, is the whole thing of religious connotation of Mahabharata and Krishna as a god. And in the current context where the polarization is happening across various things, nationalism and religion being the two prominent ones, how do you, I mean, in some sense, what is that is, how do you keep them separate? I mean, is there a religious angle to it? Or do we just say, no, there is no religious? It's a common, it's applicable to everyone.
This is a difficult question again, Rajiv. It requires some time to look at. But see, fundamentally, I think in all so-called religions, there is a spiritual underpinning, right? In Hinduism, Buddhism, Sikhism, and all that, the spiritual side is very high, right? And other religions, this may not be emphasized as much. But if you can just look at the spiritual underpinnings, right? All of the religions have what they're calling perennial wisdom, no?
Yeah.
Right? And almost all of them will tell you that there is some original creator. And this original creator, this human mind cannot comprehend. That's exactly how Brahma is defined, or Krishna is defined. Yeah. So Krishna, in my understanding, is not a persona at all. It's a formless entity, which is just a symbolic entity in this context, right? And if you look at, if you take the Krishna figure seriously, why is Krishna such a popular god form? Because he grows with you. When he's a child, he's this fellow who'll eat butter. When he's an adolescent, he'll flirt, right? But each of them, what he does has a very, very unique, special quality in the way he engages, right? Then he grows up to be a great wrestler, right? So at each stage of human growth, there's another parallel form of Krishna that's talked about. And finally, the word Krishna simply means the indigo color of the sky on a new moon night, right? Which is that depth of infinity. That's what the word means. If somebody gets caught with saying this is the Godhead and this and that, I don't know what to do. But there is certainly not, even the Mahabharata, I don't think the intent is this, because there's a discussion even there about various forms of Ishvara, the formless Ishvara, all that is discussed in the book itself. So it's not in any way giving you one formula or one dogmatic picture at all. In fact, the whole book is about how people who are dogmatic screw up the world, and how people who are willing to be reflective can redefine Dharma and therefore be dharmic at every point of time. That's the whole book, na?
Yeah. I think also the word Dharma, gets very in Indian, this thing is translates to religion, as well as translates to duty. And I think that also creates a lot of confusion.
That's right.
I'm saying, am I a Hindu Dharma, which is a religion, or am I being dharmic, which is mean I'm doing the right thing? And maybe we should start, with the Indic team, separating this out and create another name for religion and says, that is not Dharma. Well, I don't think we can take Dharma and Dharma Sankat from the duty context. That is so unique to us.
You can't.
Whereas religion is not unique to us.
Even the word duty, Rajiv, is a poor English translation of kartavyam. Kartavyam really means my response capability, my responsibility, and words like this would be closer to kartavya, right? And nishkamya karma kind of an idea than duty. Huh? Duty is a Victorian word.
Completely. No, I agree.
Yeah. I'm going to combine some of the questions that the common pattern what I'm seeing, between Anjanji and Dinesh and all have asked is, in today's world, we see the divide. I mean, we talk about it in other contexts of the supremacy, the nationalism, and how they are sometimes dividing. As we here in this conference together, in this call, what is our dharma as an individual against the systemic forces we are seeing? That is something that's coming up across multiple questions. How to deal with the complexity, how to hold oneself.
See, that would be at one level an individual response. Now, I have to wake up and ask myself, what world would I like to build, and what kind of world would I like to be part of? Yeah. And one also has to be humble and say, I don't know really. I'm going to make a choice based on my best judgment. And hopefully you have used some of these ways to look at yourself and clarify your mind and spend some little time in the Arjuna moment of asking, right, where is my response coming from? Is it coming from a dharmic core, or is it coming from somewhere else? Is it motivated in some way? And I act. If I find out that I'm wrong, I go on an exile. I go and and say that I made a mistake, because that's what Yudhishthira does, right? He gambles and then he has to go and figure it out. What in me made me gamble? So I don't think there's any quick answer for this.
Right.
Yeah, but also you'll have to look at some of these things in a historical context. And, I think some evoking or provoking of an idea of India today, the kind we are seeing, is inevitable. I wish we had been more wise after independence and helped, some re-understanding and research, literally, of our own traditions, which didn't happen.
Yeah, I'm just correcting it too. When we talked about Draupadi, how you said if someone doesn't have that anchor that informs, and Rajiv beautifully put it, this road but did not lose the dignity. That's because she was really anchored with that Krishna intelligence inside her. Listening to the question, I'm thinking that's probably the ways to find that anchor and hold on to it, which then leads you through a lot of the context we have today.
Yeah.
So there are a lot of questions. One is about, very interesting. This is I'm going to pick it up, Rajiv, because it's a Tamil question. It says, why are we looking at a Sanskrit? One person has asked. It's a Mahabharata is a Sanskrit thing. But Raghu, you talked about how Mahabharata is a Tamil tradition for the last 1,000 years.
Of course, it's a Tamil tradition.
So
my understanding of Mahabharata is largely by talking to Kuthu artists, talking to Namatha Swami, and there are a number of Tamil editions, Tamil versions of Mahabharata. The Sanskrit Tamil question is to my mind, is an unnecessary controversy, because I don't think any real, there are so many great Tamil authors who all of them knew Sanskrit. Yeah, some of the best Tamil versions of Ramayana are written by Muslims. So this is, I don't think it's a useful controversy at all to bring in. They're both great languages, and if you learn a language, you're open to great insights in that language. Yeah, so learn French, learn Italian, learn everything, man. And you can understand the depth of some of the most beautiful things if you learn that language and not in the translation. Huh? Learn Chinese maybe now. Mandarin also is important.
great. Sophia, do we have time for one question, or do you want to comment too?
Namaste. We have time for one more question, please. Yes.
All right, so I'm just looking at the audience question again. There was one about Bhishma, and again, I'll combine 2-3 questions here together. In a Bhishma, of course, you explain how Bhishma was caught in that not being able to make a decision, and he apologizes, in his deathbed. So first of all, okay, looks like he followed the letter of law instead of the spirit of the law. That right now is obvious in the Niti Nyaya you talked about. But how do we judge somebody without knowing what context or what archetype the person is operating from?
You don't judge. No, simple, Maggie.
Right.
If I want to be a leader, I don't judge people. I have discrimination. Discrimination is very different from judging. If I have to be discriminant, it's very important that I am quiet. This is very clearly stated in the dance tradition. I have to understand Shantam. I have to be in a quiet space. When I'm in a quiet space, I will, my whole being, my prakriti, my psychosomatic system will resonate with you. I will read that resonance and act from that resonance. I never ever know about the external. This is very foundational to Indian thinking, right? That is why the whole Mahabharata, the Bhagavad Gita, the 5 horses, it's not 4 horses, by the way. Lots of people now paint 4 horses. There are 5 horses because there are 5 senses. How do you understand the senses, and how do you hold the senses, rein the senses back and keep it at a quietness so that I can respond appropriately? So I never judge a person. I am only contextually intelligent and contextually aware and totally quiet inside. Then the right responses will come through, and Krishna or whoever your God is will speak through you. If I don't have that inner silence, my ego will act.
Right. Yeah. There are definitely a lot more questions. Probably, Sophia, we can take them from you later and see if we can get back to folks on that.
So, Raghu, my closing question will be, really the book has not been written as like 7 habits, here are the 7 things you need to do. It is a lot more a dialogue, a lot more of introspective.
That's right. That's
So
right.
people who read this book, how do they work with it to become the best what they can be, which is, really the underlying theme behind it?
See, I think the first critical thing is they read it slowly. They don't read it like a novel. No? Yeah, that is one. And the second is, I'd be very happy if they write copious notes on the side. No? Just as the dialogues are there, they also include themselves in the dialoguing process. And if they keep track, maybe in a notebook or something like that, of their own responses as they are reading, maybe the dialogue will clear up some of them, maybe it won't, right? But one of the critical things to remember is that in learning, your deep questions are much, much more important than the answer, right? So I think through the dialogue that we have put in the book, we're actually raising a few critical questions also in it. And those questions can never be answered. See, in the Indian learning tradition, there is something called a Shesha Prashna. Shesha Prashna means the questions that remain. Right? So after every interaction you have, questions like who am I, where am I, why am I here will always remain. For that context, you'd have answered it in one way, but you can never fully answer it. In doing what I'm doing, what am I really doing? You'll have to answer after the event, right? Have I been part of the solution? Have I been part of the problem? These are all questions that will remain. And I think what the book is doing is to help people have a framework through which you can ask these questions and come up with your own answers. Right? And towards the end, we've also given a practical case study, of how a leader uses many of the ideas in this book and fundamentally asks these questions in a context and things like that. And I'm hoping all the interviews of the great leaders that we've been able to talk to, that will also give an insight to people, because all of them in one way or the other reflect many of these ideas in their own lives, and they've been very frank in the way they've spoken to us. Yeah, like Maggie was saying, you have somebody like Anu who's been through one set of very deep personal experiences, and you have Mustafa who's had a whole different context from which he comes, and they've really shared from their heart. Yeah, we were very lucky at the way they shared and the way they had these dialogues with us.
Yeah, I think the important thing is that the dialogue, I think that's a word which constantly keeps on coming. And mostly it is dialogue within yourself. And that's what most of the leaders talk about, that you need to have a dialogue with yourself. And that is a source of reflection.
That's the key. And you need some framework to have this dialogue.
Correct,
when you have a framework, these dialogues become much easier. If you don't have a framework, it becomes difficult.
Yeah.
So what we're offering really is just this framework.
Yeah. Thanks, Raghu. Sophia, all yours too.
Namaste. Thank you so much, everyone. That was so insightful. And, I'm sure all of us, our participants, and I also, we learned a lot. So thank you so much for that deeply insightful session and for so patiently answering everyone's questions. And, Maggie ji, you did a great job sort of combining the questions, because I think the essence of a lot of questions was the same. So thank you, everyone. And also one of our participants said they had to leave the session early and wanted a recording. So for everyone who's watching, the sessions are recorded and they will be available on our YouTube channel, on the Indica Yoga YouTube channel, and also on our website and on our social media. So you can watch the entire session again, share it and access it anytime you like. So before we wrap up today's session, there's just two announcements I'd like to make from Indica Yoga. Of course, please join us again for next week's Yoga Insight session. It's going to be a session on mind training through compassion meditation. This session will be held by Nitesh Batra ji, who is the founder of Ashtanga Yoga Sadhana and the Mindful Initiative. And also the other announcement is we're having our first retreat in Goa. Indica Yoga has collaborated with Hatha Yoga teacher Alisha Netalkar. And the retreat is called Darshana, Experience the Self. It's going to be held from the 6th to the 12th of November in Goa. So you can register for this on our website, indicayoga.com. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Raghuji, before we leave, would you like to leave us with any message that we should all imbibe in our daily life?
Have fun, make mistakes, and introspect, in that order.
That's beautiful advice. Thank you so much. And also for everyone who's watching, we've just sent you the link to Amazon. That's why you can get Raghuji's book, The 5 Seats of Power. So the link is there. You can buy the book there. So please access that link right now if you'd like to get a copy of the book. Thank you so much, Raghuji. Thank you, Maggie ji, and thank you, Rajiv ji, for this beautiful session. Thank you for all our participants for joining, and Koti ji for making sure everything goes smoothly. I'll see all of you next week. Thank you so much. Have a beautiful day.
Thank you.
Thank you, Raghu and Rajiv.